Hey guys, Mark here. Welcome to my video on the bubble sort and with basic array. We've got that going on right over here, so let's get straight into it. We have an integer, which is a final, which is the max value, which is a easy way to have a variable to change the max size of your array. We have an integer count, which we're initializing to 0, and then we're creating the array right here. We're naming it nums, and we are giving it the size of the max value. We have count, which is going to be equal to, we have populated array. So in order to, before we do this assignment, we have to go down to the populated array and see what we get this down to a literal as. I have a video on this, pretty basic. We're going to have a scanner, new scanner system in. We're going to have a count, boolean valid true, and now I'm going to do while valid and has next x, the nth element of the array x, which is so x count starting at 0 is equal to sc next integer, because it's a array of integers. And in this method, it's named x. It's a local variable. It can be named whatever we'd like. Boolean valid is going to be assumed to be true. We're going to have this, where I'm setting the criteria for what valid is, and then count's going to iterate. And I'm returning count, so we can count how many elements that were inputted into the possible 5 spots. How many did we actually put in? And what's really important is that when you do create a Boolean for taking an input from a keyboard, which is a little bit more tedious than from a file, it's really important to have the valid criteria first. Otherwise, this is actually read in order. So if you have while sc.next and valid, it'll go through, it'll take one more value than it should, because it's going to have something next, but it's not going to be valid. It's a little hard to explain it, but if you test it out, you'll understand after a little bit of fidgeting. And again, the order of how valid is described is important as well, because just the tricky variable stuff, which is really important to spend some time digesting. Nonetheless, let's go on to the bubble sort. So we return the count, and now this count is assigned to the literal value of count, which is an integer, which is the return type. And we're going to print out the count. Now we have another method that's going to send us way down to here. Now, if we go ahead and check this guy out while those arrows mess up, we have a method, and its return type is void, because bubble sort's not going to return anything, but it's just going to sort stuff, so it can manipulate things outside of its method. We have an integer array named x, again a local variable. We have an integer n, which is going to be the passed value of count. So in this case, we're just going to name it n. Creating an integer named pass, I, and hold. Pass is going to be for the outer loop, which is going to be able to count and make sure we pass through all of our elements, and then I is going to be the actual manipulating of the elements inside of the array, and hold is going to be our temporary one if such criteria is met. We have a Boolean switch true. This is going to be our switch, and this isn't absolutely necessary, but it is useful, and it's one means to creating a more optimized algorithm that once this criteria for being switched or sorting is no longer met, it'll go out of the loop, and it technically saves a little bit of time and a little bit of memory and all of that. But anyway, let's go into the first for loop. We're setting pass is equal to 0, so starting at the 0th element, starting at 0. This is a for loop that's going to iterate through all of this. Pass is less than n is the size of our array minus 1. So we want to start at the size of our array minus 1, because once we get to the end, that's where the minus 1 is there, it's already going to be switched due to the nature of this. And switched, which means while switched is true, pass plus iterate through the size of the array, because n is the size of the array. And then once we're in here, switch should be false, because by default, when we actually go into it, nothing is actually switched. And I know this can seem kind of counterintuitive, but if you start writing these a couple times, you'll understand why it makes a little more sense, and it's easier to remember because of the way we're going to phrase it down here. So switched is going to be false, and at this point, it's false because nothing has been switched yet. That's the rationale behind it. And now we have the inner loop, which is really going to do the manipulating of the sort. And I probably should have mentioned this, but this bubble sort's going to sort things in order, so from lowest to highest. So we're having for I, so the 0th element of the array x, for I equals 0, and then while I is less than n minus 1, again, that's the same reason for that, as well as being subtracted by pass. And the reason for that is because pass is the outer. Let me draw this, but it's going to be a little bit messy, right? Pass is the outer loop, right? And every time this iterates, this isn't going to come across correctly, and we're checking through all of this, and then, okay, that's fine. So we swapped it around. Now let's iterate our pass. Anyway, because when you pass an element, you don't want to do that element again, because this will evaluate as true every time, or once it switches once, it'll evaluate as true every time, and you can get stuck in an infinite loop. So this is why we iterate through this over here. It's a little bit harder to explain, but if you go ahead and try it in your IDE, you will see that it will not work correctly. We go on in here and we iterate through I. Now we have our tricky little if statement that's really not so tricky at all. It's simply going to state that if the nth element, here denoted as I, of the array x is greater than the nth element, denoted as I, plus 1. Now the plus 1 is pointing to the elements to the right, or the element 1 above, with the index of I. And again, the index of I, the ith or the nth index, is 0. So if we start at 0 and we're saying if this 0th index is greater than the, 0 plus 1 index, which would be, let's do this, right? So we have the 0th index, we have the first one, and we're going to say if this, let's say this is 6, and this is 4, right? So if this is met, which it's going to be met in this case, essentially, is 6 greater than 4? Yes, it is. This is greater than 4. So now we're going to say hold is equal to this. So now hold is equal to 6. That's 6. Now I, which is the 0th element, is now going to be equal to I plus 1 element to the right. So that's going to be this element over here. So now this is equal to 4. Ooh, that 4 is chubby. And then we're going to do the element to the right, which is this one, which is 4. Right now, this turned into 4. Right? So we have 4 and 4, technically. That's a beautiful 4, isn't it? And then we're going to say, okay, so now xi plus 1, which is this element right here, is now going to equal to hold. And what were we holding? We were holding 6, which is the element to the left. So now we have this 4, 6, and essentially what we went from is we switched 6 and 4 while maintaining the integrity of the data inside of the array. Seems a little tricky, but I hope that diagram helped. And then we're going to switch the switch of switched. We're going to flip that switch on, and we're going to say, hey, it's true now. And if it's not, the switch is going to be false. The reason why I put this in here, it's not necessary, but just for demonstration purposes, this is what the defaults of Java is. It knows, okay, well, if this is true, and switch is equal to true, else switch is equal to false. That's a given, but I put it in there just to make it a little more obvious for you guys if it doesn't click in your head right away. It sure didn't in mine when I first went through this. And then for the rest of this program, really quickly, we just have a print, just because to print an array, you cannot just print the array name. It'll give you the location in memory, and you'll be confused why there are brackets and a bunch of numbers and letters. This is just going to iterate through the length of the array and print it out. So we have our interactive checker, and because I didn't just do it from a file, read from a file, which would have been a little bit easier, it's just going to actually take input. And we have the maximum to be 5, so I mean I could do the 5th element, but I'm just going to put in 0 to short circuit it. So it's going to say count at 5, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 0 is put in, so essentially I would probably modify the counted to be -1. Because we have the switch, it's really all conditional to what we're moving around. So we have 5 elements, that's correct, and then the sorted array is here, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, which now you can see that's in order, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. We can see the functionality there. We can do 4, 3, and let's see, if we max this out, we'll probably get an out of bounds exception. And that's one of the downfalls of taking in input without specifying certain things. But if we were writing the program, we would have to set some more limits of how and where. But for all intents and purposes, this does work correctly, and we have our little sort going on. I did it again. I put 0 in last. You know, what would be a good idea is to put your count as your Boolean. That would work well, because then automatically when every time you get input, the count will iterate, and then once count reaches a certain thing, let's see, yeah, once count reaches just count in general, once count reaches above, let's say 4 or 5, it'll automatically go out. That would be an optimization that I could do. But anyway, as you can see, it does work, and this is the whole entire structure of a basic program that does bubble sorting. You know, I hope this is clear to you, and I hope you understand it. I'd really like to go into, and I would go deeper into, the data structures of these things, but it would just make these videos a lot longer, and I tend to avoid that, because I tend to avoid videos that are very long. Yeah, so if you do have a question, just feel free to put it in the comment, and if a single one of you requests for a more detailed breakdown of any specific topic, I would be happy to go ahead and do a video covering that specifically. Alright, well, thanks so much for watching, and please use the feedback utilities below via like, dislike, and comments. Thank you very much. Goodbye.